in that kind of illicit behavior or do things that could actually damage the reputation of the community that's already embraced them. So in this initial stage, the idea for a tier 1 you would need two things. One, the country of incorporation, right? And basically every project, it has to actually exist somewhere. You have a lot of projects that are based in the United States, but they have a piece of their company is actually in another country. And I think it's important that people know what country that is, because different countries have different requirements, and that's an important thing. And sometimes it's extremely difficult when you're looking at tokens to find out what country that project is actually in. Sometimes no matter how much research you do, you can't find that information. Sometimes it's intentionally hidden, or sometimes projects don't know that it's something that people are going to be looking for, right? But I think that's really important, that you know where that project is actually, according to international law, located. And then for that tier 1, at least doxing of at least one team member. A lot of people like their privacy and really value their privacy within the blockchain space. Some of the people on our team are, really value their privacy as well. I totally understand that. So that's why for a tier 1, at least one team member to be willing to identify themselves to the community, so that there can be at least one point person if something happens and you need to be able to contact somebody in, support, for example, instead of just saying contact at soandsomail.com, right? You need to know there's a physical person who you could, jump on a 5-minute Zoom call with, right? Because you should care about your community enough to do something like that, especially if they're staking, their hard-earned tokens or anything else into your project. So that's for the lowest tier, essentially, is that's kind of the idea. And then it kind of it is staggered from there. So for tier 2, 2 months since mint. One referral from a 3rd tier or higher project, one referral from a 4th tier or higher project. And then also the doxing requirement from the country of incorporation, and at least 2 team members are willing to publicly identify themselves. And that's because the idea is it should be a more reliable project. And these are easy things that a project could do, right? One, you have to actually be a more mature project, and you have to be able to build your community and your network with other projects that are willing to kind of stake their reputation on you, right? And so once you end up in a situation where projects are willing to, stand up for other projects and basically stake their reputation on them, there's accountability. And that can actually go a really long way to make sure that everybody is kind of thinking about the whole ecosystem when they're making decisions, is because they know that they're accountable to 1 or 2 of these other projects that stuck their neck out for them already. So that's why I think a referral system would be really important. So a tier 3 would be just extrapolating that out a little bit farther, 3 months since mint, 1 referral from a tier 5 project. And the important thing here is that basically a tier 5 project is about the highest level of trust you can get within the ecosystem. 1 tier 5 referral is worth more than referrals from other tiers combined, right? Because they have basically the serious players within the ecosystem that are sticking their necks out for them. Okay, so for that tier, you get 1 referral from a tier 5, and then of course the doxing requirements, country of incorporation, and then the doxing of all core team members. Now tier 4 changes, okay, because with a tier 4 and tier 5, you have essentially you're building something that is getting recognized by the institutional element within the Algorand ecosystem. So for tier 4, you need to have an Algorand Foundation grant in progress, right? You don't have to have finished it yet, but you need to at least be working on something, because that means that they've done their initial due diligence for your project and what it is you're building, and are willing to basically, are offering you this initial opportunity to start building with that institutional support. So if you can demonstrate that you have an Algorand Foundation grant in progress, you would be able to reach that tier 4. You would also need a referral from a tier 5, 4 months since mint, and then the doxing requirements as well. And it changes up a little bit more for the tier 5. So for a tier 5, you would have successfully finished an Algorand Foundation grant, or you would have received investment from either the foundation or Algorand Inc., or listing on a centralized exchange. And the reason for that is the Algorand Foundation, Algorand Inc., or the operators of centralized exchanges do significant due diligence, and they have, serious reputations. So having one of those institutional supporters sticking their neck out for you goes a really, really long way, right? I mean, obviously, this isn't a foolproof system, and as soon as we open it up to the floor, I would love to hear all the holes in it, or things that I'm missing from this initial introduction, essentially. And then also meet the minimum doxing requirements. Those are basically a given already, right? Because if you're on a centralized exchange, or you've received investment from one of these different people, institutional people within the ecosystem, then they would have essentially already needed that as well. So basically, the idea is that through these different tiers, by having people from a higher tier vouching for you, you then can become accountable to them, and it can kind of create trust that way. And it's a way that you could easily progress, if you're a new project, through this system to establish trust within the larger community. And with that, I will open it up to anybody that would like to speak and share their initial thoughts or opinions about this as well. All right, Fred, got you as a speaker now.
Thanks, Aaron. First of all, thanks for putting this together. I really like your rough draft. I just have maybe one suggestion for tiers 4 and 5, not to be so exclusive as the sense that the company must have or must be working on a foundation, grants from the foundation. Maybe it can be considered some sort of major ecosystem grant investment, because maybe their work is borderless capital, maybe they're working on another VC fund, but as long as it has some confirmed VC money that's not their friends and family, maybe that should be good enough. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually agree with that 100%. And that was one thing I was going to say, is that there is a whole bunch of room to expand the list of those institutional pillars of the ecosystem that would be willing to vouch for you, essentially. Yes. So I'm 100% in agreement to expand the definition of those institutional pieces of the referral system.
Awesome. Great work, by the way. I love this.
Aaron, just real quick, is there any way to try to incorporate this with NFT creators and artists by any chance down the road, or create some system for that?
That is an excellent question. This was initially done specifically with ASAs in mind, and the reason for that is because a lot of ASA projects will end up either trying to or working on Algorand Foundation grants, which is a really great, like in the trenches sort of process you can go through, where you really, prove your worth to the community, essentially. So that is an excellent question. So for NFTs, let's open up the floor. What are some different things that they could do? Basically ecosystem participation that could, fill that Algorand Foundation grant kind of piece of this. What do you guys think?
Sales volume, maybe?
Well, I see a lot of NFT projects, they partner together, and that, in fact, that's how I primarily learn about a lot of projects, is that one project will put their reputation on the line, and then they will, support and partner with other projects. So maybe the NFT community in itself can create its own little sort of playbook or system for that.
So I think what you could do then is remove the grant element and make it you could keep the bones of it and make it like a pure referral system, right? And you would still need one of those institutional referrals at that tier 1, because that's important, right? And by institutional, I mean either recognition from the Algorand Foundation, Algorand Inc., a venture capital firm, or something like that, right? Because that is the important part of this, is that up to a tier 4, you can get referrals from other projects or members of the ecosystem, but for that top tier, you need at least one institutional referral. The question is do NFT collections has the Algorand ecosystem for NFTs reached a maturity level for that kind of institutional support for a large enough range of different collections?
Aaron, and how about instead of switching the investment requirements to maybe being in the top 5%, 10% of algo NFT sales? We already have some trackers and some rankings, so maybe to reach the higher tiers, you have to be in the certain, in a certain quintile of NFT sales across the marketplaces.
The question is can sales alone be a high enough of a marker to, because if you're a great salesperson, you could get those really high sales with a project that's still not legitimate. So that's why, relying strictly on sales might not get us there all the way.
Hey, Aaron, I just wanted to chime in on this. Kraken and I and some other people have been trying to do something in his Discord where if a new project applies, we kind of just crowdsource vet it and try and Google, reverse image search it and just try and find it on other marketplaces. But it's not perfect, and it's a very small amount of people. I think it would be really cool if you had a big system like Forum, for example, and you could essentially post the series up and then just get a crowdsourced upvote, downvote kind of thing, and then just give it the headline, stamp of approval, because it's power in numbers. One person doing this, it's so hard to find every little thing that could be copied, because reverse Google searches don't always work. So you have to get really creative with how you can track some of these stolen images down. But yeah, I think there is power in numbers. And so if there was some crowdsourced way to vote on it, it'd be really cool. Potentially using algo vote, right?
I think you could potentially make a DAO structure specifically for a community verification process, right? Where, the elements that go into this verification system are voted on by all the members of the community. I have very mixed feelings about the idea of voting on specific projects, specifically because within the Web2 space, the traditional voting structure is very easy to abuse, right? So if you're on Yelp, for example, or even if you download a new app from the App Store, a lot of times they'll promise premium features if you leave them a 5-star review, or there's so many different ways that projects try to game the system if it's done in a pure voting, sort of way, versus if the elements of a verification process were voted on. And the way I saw this working out was essentially that for tier 5 projects, we would be able to verify, but for the rest of them, they would actually have to request verification, right? So they would have to actually, do the due diligence themselves in order to, do those verification steps. So that it's always incumbent on the project themselves to kind of look at themselves in the mirror and see what they need to do to move up versus, us rating projects without their interest in being rated, essentially, is kind of the way I saw it.
That's totally fair. Like, put up a form essentially and say, hey, if you want the headline seal of approval, fill out this essentially mini NFT KYC thing. And if you, fill this out, and it checks out, then we'll give you like our seal of approval. And it's just like one little check mark that could be on NFT Explorer, for example, to give people a little extra faith in the project, maybe.
Hey, Aaron, just to toss up a random idea, what if you have some sort of reputation system for members to, vote? So it's decentralized in a way that any member can vote, but it's tied to their headline forum profiles. So they all have, skin in the game because they don't want a bad badge on their profile, but they can have a good badge if, like, say, they vote a lot and they are usually in consensus with the community and there are no rug pulls related, so people can report. And you already have some sort of veto because, to use the website, you already have to have HDL tokens to begin with. So, you could try to think of a structure that ties reputation to the system. But of course, with the smaller percentage, with the larger percentage of the decision to verify a project or not, being, of course, the checklist we just posted, which is a great starting point.
I think it's a great idea. The only downside to using Forum for stuff like this right now is that we haven't really reached that inflection point with the number of users that represent a large enough section of the entire ecosystem, right? Because Forum is primarily the hardcore headline supporters, right? And really, for something like this to work well, we need to have a really good subsection of the entire ecosystem so that everybody is represented, while something like this is getting built. Because I initially thought of this as something to use for Algo Cloud. So with Algo Cloud, we're going to have an entire analytics piece of it, right? That's it's going to have the analytics for all the DEXs, and it's going to be able to do customizable stuff for all the different ASAs. So it was just the idea of what if we had a verification badge, depending on what level you're at within the analytics piece of Algo Cloud. But, just hearing the feedback for this, it would be much better if something like this could be adopted ecosystem-wide instead of ending up splitting it into multiple different sorts of verification systems. And then we wouldn't call it the headline verification. We would just call it the ecosystem verification, right? And we could potentially have the entire ecosystem vote on what the recs should be for this different thing and have maybe, people from different projects that are would already be at the agreed upon tier 5 to kind of determine the structures that would be required to move up or get the approvals and what essentially the ledger of this verification process would be stored on and everything else. I think that would be a much better solution than to basically be a headline seal of approval on stuff. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally see it.
And I think there's plenty of people in the community, those tier 5s you speak of, that would love to get together and discuss it and work out something, I would have to imagine.
Kind of something like how you all have been doing with Algo Vote, almost like an Algo Verify, and kind of like a toolkit that other DEXs or things along those lines or exchanges on the ecosystem could use, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'd be one of those things where, for this to really work well, we need to get basically everybody on board with it, the whole ecosystem. And I think the timing is right for this, right? Because the foundation just announced that they're suspending their verification process because of things that have happened. I know that, Rand Labs has been talking for a long time that they were planning to update the verification on Algo Explorer, because the verification on Algo Explorer was always only supposed to be that the URL for your website is actually your URL. It was that simple for the verification for Algo Explorer. But a lot of these projects, they either don't understand that, or people, when they're new to the ecosystem, don't understand that. So there's confusion around the verification pieces that are in place. And, some of the verification structures that were already in place are being shut down. So if there was ever a time for the whole community to agree on something and, put it into action, this would be the perfect time to do it.
Definitely agree.
Let's hear some cons to this. Okay, so far, I'm hearing, a lot of support basically for what the general idea is. But let's hear some ways that this could not work out as planned, or some blind spots that I might have had when I was putting this together. What do you guys think?
Scalability, I think, would, especially if it becomes like a headline only thing versus a decentralized ecosystem thing. A lot of third-party verifications, typically, like if you look at like other public cloud systems, take a lot of work. Typically, like Teams, one of the organizations I work for, we had actually a community page where people would kind of vote on roadmap, drive, like product direction from like a community standpoint, and we had actually sustained that with like a full team. And eventually, like if things churned or we kind of lost the momentum, the community verification or road mapping system kind of died. So that would be an advantage to doing it ecosystem wide versus centralized. But that would be, I'd say, like one critical issue, just like scalability, who maintains it, who updates it. It'd have to be almost like a governance thing, like chain wide or something along those lines.
Yeah, it'd be great if we had somebody that has experience setting up DAOs that is in between projects that would be willing to spearhead setting the structures up for this to work, right? Because I think that we want this to happen. Question is, what is the most effective, efficient way to get us from this conversation to something that actually works and something that can actually be adopted ecosystem-wide? What do you guys think?
Well, looking at the amount of people here in the space, I would have to say first off, definitely have to get more people involved in the conversation, and almost have to have a round 2 set up in the future with some people putting a word out just to get more heads and more minds together.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that is basically an introduction to what could be a system, right? This is the initial feedback brainstorming stage of a system that could be adopted more broadly. Perhaps in the short term, we could continue developing this as a headline verification system, and then if it, as it's gaining traction, we could, let a DAO structure take over that could be ran by the ecosystem, and that we could kind of hand off. In addition to that, this is the perfect kind of thing that we would love to provide funding for. So if somebody said, we want to do this, we'd be like, we will give you funding so that you can do this, right? Because I was in the Algo fan chat the other day, and I was like, it's incumbent on us as the projects that are really want to see Algorand succeed, that we do our part to make sure it does succeed. And these are the kinds of things that we can't rely on Algorand Inc. or Algorand Foundation to do for us. This is incumbent on us to make sure it actually happens, so that as new people are joining the ecosystem, they don't end up in a situation like happens a lot with Ethereum or some of these other chains, where we can actually create a stronger base for growth than some of these other chains had at this stage, specifically because we could come together as an entire ecosystem and have these kinds of conversations.
I just wanted to mention quickly that OpenSea does billions in sales every month, and they still do manual verification.
So this shit is not easy. Like, there is no silver bullet. And like, I know Zestbloom is working on some stuff with like, essentially like trying to like AI reverse image search stuff to tell if it's ever been, you know, put on the internet anywhere or on Algorand anywhere. But yeah, it's not perfect, you know, because that doesn't guarantee it's original either. Like, it could have just been only hand produced and then they just scanned it. And so there's no verification there either. So like, you're essentially saying to these artists, okay, you guys need to submit like a resume of work to, you know, show that, you know, you're an artist, and then you need to submit like a essentially like a video of you doing this work, said work, like a proof of work. And so how do you review that in an automated way? You know, there's almost no way to do it. At least not that I know.
So that's, you know, that's a really unique problem in the NFT space. You know, so you know, for the broader ecosystem, as far as verifying ASAs, that's not as much of a problem because of the incentive structure. You know, but and that's a tricky thing that I think doxing just in general, you know, it could potentially you know, scare away a lot of bad actors from, you know, either starting projects or continuing them if they know that you know, anonymity is going to hurt their chances of their scam being successful. You know, but that gets back to the question of, you know, where do you draw the line between you know, what DeFi is, you know, trying to become with a trustless system, and then reverting back to Web 2 solutions for verification, right? Because it's not trustless if we have to form a committee to determine the validity of something, right? So what is the trustless solution for NFT verification? That's the $1 million question in the NFT space. How do you get a trustless solution there?
It's like $1 billion question right now for OpenSea. I have no idea what they're doing. It takes like literally, it'll take like a month for a completely legit project that it takes you 5 minutes to tell it's legit to get verified. And it makes absolutely no sense. So you can tell it's broken. Like there's flaws in the system. And for ASA verification, it's like, oh my God, like good luck, you know, yeah, good luck. It's tough, you know. Even like we were talking about this in the space earlier, that like the foundation has a very hard time distinguishing like real projects from, you know, something that's just going to go nowhere. Because at the end of the day, all they're seeing is like a white paper or like a pitch deck. So they're not getting, you know, too much DD there. It's just not possible.
It's a strange idea, but how about a fee? If they have a certain amount set aside, that way if they do try to jump out, they lose that amount?
Something like insurance. You're talking about insuring your collection. That's actually an excellent idea, and that's actually what I consider to be one of the big solutions for all the problems in the blockchain space. Right now, we got governments that are trying to regulate something that really they should let insurance companies regulate, because insurance companies are better at determining risk than anybody on the planet, right? You let insurance companies start insuring crypto tokens and NFT collections, their due diligence is better than all of ours combined. I just saw that project got approved for an Algorand Foundation grant that's talking about doing insurance in Algorand. I hope it's insurance that's related to the actual assets on chain and not the real world, right? Because, you know, if we can provide insurance for all of these different things that we're having issues with, because you can provide insurance in a trustless way. You know, so you talk about a trustless solution for all of these things, you might not be able to stop people from you know, scamming people with their NFT collections, but if they are required to have a basically smart contract, trustless insurance solution for their collection, then once people find out, that would kick in, and the harm would be mitigated. What do you guys think about that?
It'd also be a good way to keep scammers in who just think they can just hop in and go, hey, I made something, come get it, and disappear.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it from every direction, and I'm thinking like, okay, if there's a way to game this, they'll do it, right? So like, if the insurance, like if the insurance doesn't hurt, then they'll still scam. Like, so if they only have to put up 5K algo, but then they can scam 50K algo, it doesn't really matter, right? It's more about like them actually facing punishment, in my opinion. Like, so I think the doxing thing is huge, because then they're like taking the risk of like jail time and like fines and like, real charges. So I think doxing is one of the most powerful things for projects releasing tokens. If they're not doxing themselves with the token, then there's probably a reason. Like just guessing, right?
The one challenge too, especially if there's like a financial barrier to entry, you kind of take the good actors who might not have that upfront finance to kind of participate in that insurance. Maybe, hey, two people, hey, great idea, like let's try this out, kind of working out of their garage, trying to just kind of scrounge up, some development. So that could also kind of be, suddenly it's too hard to get into the ecosystem as a result of like that kind of upfront like algo that you throw into like a escrow account that's kind of held until you have like some form of maturity to prove that you're a trustworthy project. I agree with the doxing because it's like simple. Hey, this is who I am. Here's our white paper. This is either like our LLC with who's part of it, or these are the two like shepherds of this overarching project. Because then that does create like direct accountability. What falls back into like the Web 2 concepts you were talking about.
Am I interrupting anybody?
No, go right ahead. You have the floor.
So there's two things I want to say. First of all, I think there's a big like in crypto. There's a lot of wool pulled over their eyes by companies calling their product a protocol. Like that seems to just be a blanket term to try to distance oneself from the fact that that is a company. And it's like, you can call yourself a protocol, and that kind of seems like the word to describe a decentralized like set of smart contracts that will run no matter what. But really, most of the time it comes back to, few people in the company just like who can make the final decisions on shit. So I think like that's a big thing that needs to change. People like calling their companies protocols when it's a company. And like, let's be honest, it's a company. You're a company using the blockchain as your like basis to build off, but you're not a protocol. Like you're only a protocol when the team, in my opinion, and this is just one man's opinion, you're only a protocol when the team is literally not working on the product at all. Like you step back completely, you've said, I'm giving it to the community, and you don't even touch it. That's a protocol. The holders are completely in control of it. And the original team who created the idea are gone. Second point I want to make is that there's a whole lot of opportunity for job creation here, and like low-key part-time jobs. And I think one powerful aspect of blockchain is that you can actually give power to the court of public. And a lot of people want to defer like insurance decisions, let's say, to experts. And I'm actually here proposing like, why don't we just get, instead of like a few insurance people who work at an insurance company, determining the claim and whatever, why don't we have them doing that, but then 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people, an insurance protocol, vote on like if they think that's valid or not, or what they think is worthwhile, or what they think the claim is worth, and let the actual court of public opinion determine like who deserves money and XYZ. I actually don't think everyone needs to be an expert to weigh in on something, because if you get a large enough swath of people, you'll generally trend toward what most people believe. And I think in society, it's usually best to go toward what the general public agrees with, like in a majority, because then the most people will be satisfied. So yeah, those are my two takes. One, protocol and company, and a lot of the time things are companies, not protocols. And secondly, if anyone can figure out like how to, let's say I weigh in on an insurance claim, like someone had a car crash or something, or not, fuck it. Let's say it's like, let's say it's just something on chain, like loud DeFi, like let's say I'm basically going to determine, is this a scam or not? I'm not like a degree or anything to say it, but everyone can agree that's a scam. So why don't we leave it to a public vote, and everyone who takes part in that gets like a slight payout and some DAO token. And yeah, you just get rewarded for participating in like court of public opinion.
I think those are excellent points. And the interesting thing about this insurance conversation is you talk about blockchain being a nascent industry. Insurance on blockchain is like barely even in the conversation yet. You talk about on the bleeding edge of innovation. Building a mechanism like this for a DAO-based insurance structure would be basically unheard of. I've never heard of something quite like that, but I think it's a brilliant solution that would solve so many of these problems. Have any of you guys heard of something like that on other chains before?
I've never heard of anything like it on another chain, but I mean, I'm glad you like the idea. And I had this idea kind of when the Tiny Man hack happened, and I was like, what if we could have some type of decentralized bug bounty system? And like thinking through it, it was actually I ran into a lot more problems than I expected, because my estimations for how it would work all relied on people being honest. And you can't really rely on that. So let's say let's say there was like a bug bounty protocol where different companies submit their code that's on testnet to the protocol, and then like random coders from the Algorand ecosystem check it out and see if they can find any bugs with it. Like, and then if they take part in that, there's the first group of people who check out the code, then a second group of people who verify that. So there's like two groups of auditors, I guess, like decentralized auditors. Problem is, what if someone finds two bugs in the protocol, reports one to the DAO, gets paid out from a pool? So it's like, okay, I found a bug, I get a bounty, I get like 100K, whatever. That's just an arbitrary number. That's like most of the pool. Drain it, and then there's another bug, and I just wait till mainnet, and then I just do the second thing. And I just drain the protocol anyway after getting paid out from this. So that's the other thing that comes into play with decentralized insurance. It's like, how do you ensure people are honest? I think this kind of would require zero knowledge proofs in some way, where you can have people be doxed and KYC'd, but in an anonymous way. So the only way that they become liable is if they like fuck up the decision, and then you can like bring it back to them. But again, it's like, there's just, a lot of these things rely on people being honest, but you can't rely on people to be honest when they're anonymous. So that's the difficulty.
You can probably rely on the community, to be honest, right? Because here you use an example, just one person, and maybe that person would act maliciously, but you have other developers, other people looking at the code, so maybe someone else is going to report the bug, right? So maybe you can trust the community to be honest, but not a certain individual.
Right. But then how many people in this community, like if this bug bounty DAO or like pre-release audit kind of thing, decentralized audit system, if that was going to be a thing, how many people in this community are actually qualified to like look at another project's code and really like go into the weeds? Like probably, maybe it's more than I think, but I still don't think it's that many. I think it's probably maybe a handful of a few hundred. And then it's an amazing concept.
I definitely agree with you. The community is very small today, and you said a few hundreds, and I think that's high. That's a high number. But I definitely agree with you. I don't think we're at that stage nowadays, but eventually we will be, and maybe we can just trust the community instead of individuals.
I think one thing that's interesting about the blockchain space kind of emerging from the like software developer space is that if you look at GitHub, for example, you talk about how a lot of these things, as far as like trust and verification, authenticity, there's so many mechanisms built within GitHub for identification signals that you would never think of in other settings, right? Like if you go on somebody's GitHub, you can see how many PRs they've done, how many different repositories, how many places they've contributed. All of these things are permanent records, right? You can't request GitHub to remove a record of an action you did on GitHub. It is, I guess, in some ways, one of the first Web 2 examples of, a transparent ledger of actions that's been done by gigantic network, right? It wasn't done in a trustless way, and it's still a centralized entity. But and I think that in some ways developers have brought some of that philosophy as far as being able to like, for example, like, so sometimes we work with freelancers, and generally, if you're working with a freelance developer that has a good reputation, their reputation is their currency, right? So like you can typically trust those people with like secret keys and passwords and things like that, because their entire livelihood is based on protecting those kinds of things. And there's so many signals within the developer space to determine the trust of a different developer, right? So it's kind of like, the developers building these, blockchains and protocols are trying to find ways to basically scale what works within the developer community to work with a lot of different communities as well. It's innovative solutions a lot of times with all of those different trust signals when they get applied to different communities. So, it's really a conversation of how we move forward in a way that, doesn't exclude people when they're new, right? Because you don't want the barrier to entry to be so high that it discourages participation. That's super important, right? You want to make sure that people that want to build something legitimate will have the opportunity to do that without having to, fight tooth and nail just to get recognized for anything, because that can scare off a lot of people that might have really innovative ideas. So it's about, creating a system that can be scalable. And that's really the challenge that, we're discussing right now.
So I missed the beginning.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. So I missed the beginning of the conversation, but just going off the title of this Twitter space, what were you guys thinking for like tiers of verification? Was it like, okay, tier 1, you have a website, kind of like what it is right now. That's just like basic, super basic. Tier 2, you have like a white paper and something else. Tier 3, you've doxed yourself. Tier 4, your product is out. Tier 5, you have like an LLC, like these different things. Like what kind of requirements were we all thinking, or what were our ideas about what these tiers could be, and like what would we want to see from a project to get them to earn our trust?
Great question. So right before the space has started, I actually post basically like a draft document on our Twitter of the different tiers and what the different requirements would potentially be. But I can go over them real quick again for people that are here. And kind of the idea is that for each tier, you have a different level of trust. And as you progress, your trust is going to be partially determined by the maturity of your project and partially determined by the other projects at a higher tier level that are willing to basically provide a referral or stick their neck out for you, right? So for tier 1, which is the lowest tier, your project has to be at least a month old since mint. You have to get a referral from at least a 3rd tier or higher project. You have to have the country of incorporation doxed, ironically, just like what you were talking about, because, we're just going to assume that all of these protocols are companies. And then to have at least one team member doxed, right? Because a lot of developers, want to respect their privacy, but at least one person from a team needs to be reachable, needs to be accountable if something goes wrong. A real person with a real name.
Right.
For tier 2, you have to be at least 2 months since mint. You have to get a referral from a 3rd tier or higher project, a referral from a 4th tier or higher project, country of incorporation, and Doxing at least 2 team members. Tier 3, it's kind of like that, but a little bit more. You need 1 referral from a Tier 5 project, which is the highest tier. Full doxing of all the core team members and the country of incorporation. It changes a little bit for Tier 4. So with Tier 4, you can have an Algorand Foundation grant in progress, because that's a big, you might not have finished one, but that means that the foundation itself has done a significant amount of due diligence. They have determined the legitimacy of your project, or at least the potential in it. But that's not enough. You also need to get a referral from a Tier 5 project, which would be one of the basically one of the core ecosystem projects. You need to be at least 4 months since mint, and then the doxing of team members and country of incorporation. And Tier 5, the highest tier, a little bit different requirements. So you need to either have received an Algorand Foundation grant, or foundation or Inc. investment, or listing on a centralized exchange. And the reason for that is that, institutional pillars do significant due diligence for each one of those steps. And, if they're willing to basically, stick their neck out for you, essentially, that's usually a pretty good signal that either, what you're building is legitimate, or, that there is some real credibility there. And then you also still have to meet the minimum project age requirements and the minimum doxing requirements in addition to that.
Right. I think that those are dope tiers. I think it's a really cool idea. I guess is there any tier for the super basic level, even below Tier 1? You don't even need a team member doxed. You just have the absolute bare minimum of a Twitter or a Reddit or something like that,
Not for ASAs, because with an ASA, the whole thing is that if other people, are going to be interacting with what you built, then, they need to have at least some kind of confidence that there's somebody that they can have a real conversation with a real name. So
Word.
you have to have at least one person that is willing to be accountable for this thing that you've built, at that very least. That's kind of that's our starting position, right?
Right.
You have to have at least somebody that can step up and say, I'll take the heat if something happens here.
I agree with that.
Hi, I'm a bit late in the session. I wanted to put another idea there. Maybe a Launchpad system would be something interesting also to have on Algorand to be part of this solution. What do you think about this?
Absolutely. So this would be for a project without any kind of affiliation, right? And it's interesting. So with the Launchpad structure, that's either going to be a Launchpad for it to work effectively. It would probably be built by a Tier 5 project, right? Because either it would be part of a foundation grant, or it would have been built by senior members of the space, ideally, right? Because you probably wouldn't want a brand new company to build a Launchpad and then launch new projects without them already having a reputation. So if you're approved to be a Launchpad project, chances are then you.
Well, we already have that now.
Which part?
Sorry, my connection dropped, so sorry if I interrupted. I was saying we already have a Launchpad now that's undoxed and totally unverified. Algo Stake, aren't they completely anonymous people? I don't know if it's a legitimate Launchpad, but it's a staking platform at least that a lot of people have put money into. We're kind of we're allowing
to be a trusted party, the Launchpad.
What I like
exactly.
to launch. What if there, let's say a token hadn't minted yet, but they wanted to have that verification upon mint. It would be cool if they could kind of do the Tier 1 requirements, and then if there was a Launchpad platform, they would do the tier 1 requirements pre-launch, and then they would be able to use the Launchpad. Or maybe they even had to get to Tier 2 to use it.
That's an excellent idea. Love it.
So, if someone didn't have a token yet, like, oh, we're going to launch our token. We want people to trust us from day one. We don't want to wait a month, like, in limbo. Yeah, I think that would be a cool addition. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, I'm taking notes right now too. So any feedback that we're getting, I'm taking notes because, like I said, this is a draft and we want to make this as tight as possible before we, if we're going to go this direction. So yeah, taking lots of notes.
So one area too, especially, while Web3 is kind of trying to revolutionize Web2, there's probably a lot of like good lessons learned from like Web2 for some of this, right? Because especially, I think, Ibu, you kind of put a really good, feedback out there that, hey, like Algorand's a platform. It's kind of like a company. They're kind of driving this platform for all these businesses to kind of build their assets on. Like if you look at like similar platforms in the marketplace, especially when you kind of got like Microsoft's Azure, you got AWS, you got like Google Cloud, they have like marketplaces that kind of push like third-party products that they go through like similar verification processes for those products. Now, obviously in a decentralized world, kind of like different considerations. You're kind of going from someone who's untrusted in a way. If they're not verified, we don't know who they are. But there could be like good areas of inspiration from like some of those listing guidelines that could maybe be applied here. And rather than like diving into like verification, which probably has its own set of like liability and things along those lines, especially Aaron, if you want to try to like lead the bus in terms of like ecosystem success, maybe almost kind of like dubbing like the proof of concept as like a project maturity score. Because like verification, hey, we've like validated your background, it kind of probably opens up liability. But when you think of here's who I am, here's the white paper, like I've had this out in the market for like a month, it kind of is a good way to also gauge like maturity of the project. And then as like the ecosystem in terms of, hey, we have governance for the platform and the protocol, but what is like governance for like user and like business success when it comes to like driving something on the platform evolves, then that's maybe something that you can build from the lessons learned of this and then kind of have that scale into something more decentralized for like the full ecosystem. That's just, some of my thoughts.
I think you raise an excellent point. But one thing to keep in mind is that the word verification and the concept around it, that's a universal concept. It's something that people can easily understand if they're new to the ecosystem. And the more nuance you add to that, the more complicated it is for people to understand when they first arrive, right? So the idea is that if people are new to Algorand from Ethereum or somewhere else, they can see a verification and be able to recognize what it represents. And the more complex you make that essentially badge, the harder it is for people that are new to be able to understand it. That would be my only con, essentially, of that idea. But I think you make an excellent point about liability and what the responsibility is of the people that are in that driver's seat, right? That's a really, really good point. The question is how to brand it in a way that everybody can still understand it, what it represents, right?
No, definitely great point as well.
Can I say one more thing? I've seen other launchpads that do, for example, they do manage the treasury of a project until it's gotten to a certain maturity. So, for example, the project sets milestone and they say we need this budget to get here. So they are only getting like from the money that they might have gotten from community, raising money from the Launchpad by the milestone that they are achieving. So maybe this another way that could be interesting. So that you don't need to verify the people beforehand, but more that they prove by the work that they do.
I agree 100%. And going back to NFTs for a second, because there's really two conversations here. There's a conversation for ASAs that trade as utility tokens or governance tokens, etc., and then the conversation for NFTs, because these are both unique situations that we're at an inflection point, I think, with growth in the ecosystem, and these are important conversations that need to be had as far as what effective ways are to basically see what's worked, what hasn't on chains like Ethereum, and see what we can improve on while we're still in that inflection stage where things aren't like cemented, right? There's still enough flexibility there that we can address some of those issues that haven't been solved on the chains. Is the general opinion then that the doxing requirements are reasonable, right? Because, that was my first big question with this is it reasonable to expect doxing from the teams that are building the blockchain space? What do you guys think?
I personally think, yes, it's completely reasonable because it goes back to what I was saying before, protocol versus company. A lot of companies like to stay anonymous because they say, oh, we're a protocol, but you're not. You're a company. Like you're just a company. Like until those tokens are decentralized, until you're not working on the product anymore, and until you're not guiding the ship, in my eyes, you're still a company. So people like to skirt around that and like kind of go with the Satoshi, mantra and they kind of use that as like their reasoning, like, oh, well, this is what the whole industry was founded off, so I can be anonymous too. And like, again, I'm just one person, but I just think times have changed and like, that's not really the case anymore. And if blockchain is going to be accepted as like a generally applicable technology, teams need to not be so secretive, and there's really no reason to be secretive if you believe in your product. I don't know why you would want to distance yourself from something that's good. I agree with the doxing too. Just doing like even like a Google search on like top launch pads, like Binance Research, first thing that they have is like the second bullet is like team behind it before they even like let anyone kind of come through that. So I think that's super reasonable, especially based on just like some of what the larger players are doing in the space.
Yeah, I agree. I think, first of all, I want to say thank you to Headline for having this space for everybody. As the creator of the Algo Leaks and as somebody who's been doxed, and my whole team has been doxed, I firmly believe that if you have nothing to hide, then there's nothing to worry about. I will say that there's an interesting, just as from my perspective personally, I've been meeting with a lot of other creators from some really known projects. And I've expressed, I prefer to fill out energy, the old school way, if you will, right? Let's talk on a Zoom. I want to see your face. You can see mine. I don't have an issue with that. And I have to say, it's been a very interesting, eerie feeling because folks who I would think are really, really open to sharing that energy aren't. And it's jarring to me at times. And these are, I will say again, relatively known projects. I'll leave it at that. But as somebody who does my own research and likes to fill out energy, I'm a big energy guy. I don't like the feeling of like, yeah, you can hear my voice, but I don't want to show my face, but I want to do business with you and I want you to trust me. It just doesn't feel right to me personally. That's all I have to say about that.
And just to play devil's advocate for a second, because I agree with you 100%. I do. To play devil's advocate, the other side of that coin is that certain projects that have like your traditional developer as the lead on a project, a lot of developers are very reclusive, private people that are not excited about the limelight at all, right? So they like to build stuff and be private. Like some of the people we work with, we get them on Zoom for 5 minutes, and then for the next 2 or 3 months, it'll just be, through text or because, a lot of developers are just, they like that they really, really value their privacy. And so when you have like the lead for a project that is also from that traditional developer space that, might be antisocial or, really just a private individual, those can be issues, right? And those, that's something that we're really having, because like in a Web 2 situation, you could have really private individuals as the CEOs of these software companies, But because so much due diligence goes into the company as it's getting built and getting permits and getting, all those different things, it's easy to track them. So we're in kind of a unique situation where those same private individuals or developers are building now and creating that innovation, but their companies aren't, they're not in that Web 2 transparency. So I think part is going to, what's going to be required is kind of getting a lot of these project leads to understand that they have more responsibility now than they might have 10 years ago when they were building other things, right?
Right. Totally. Yeah, I see your point. A lot of developers are secretive, low-key people. They just want to build, and they don't really enjoy the spotlight. They're not good public speakers. That's fine. But that's the case where you either have to get like a COO or CEO or just a PR person to just be that face, like your tier 1 system requires. You need at least someone. And secondly, if they don't even want to do that, then maybe one could make the argument they shouldn't even have anything to invest in. Like, they shouldn't have something that's publicly investable, because I don't know, that just seems fishy to a lot of people, and I just don't think that's like a good standard, right? Like we don't want it to be like okay to just launch something and you can just pretty much remove yourself from the equation if shit goes wrong.
I just imagine that all of these private developers are like the main guy in Silicon Valley, right? Just a really socially awkward person that just finds one way or another to hide whenever there's a camera pointed at him. That's how I just imagine a lot of these developers are. Obviously there are going to be the ones that really do have ulterior motives that you need to be able to recognize, and the only way to do that is for everybody to be transparent, right? Because it's harder to find that bad apple if a lot of the good players also not be transparent. That's what makes anybody's job 10 times harder when they're doing their due diligence on a project that they want to support, when there's not consistency across the space. 300%.
Right, and that could open the doors for acquisitions in the space. We don't really see many acquisitions from like companies in the crypto space, and definitely not on Algorand. I haven't really seen any companies go like, okay, like I don't think we've seen one company on Algorand buy another company on Algorand, or buy another protocol. But if there's a coder or developer or a team that wants to stay anonymous, could be the job of a bigger company to say, okay, you want to stay anonymous, so you think this is good, we'll like bring you into our fold and we'll be the face for you.
It's funny you should say that, because we've had a couple times in the market. Basically, we'll buy their companies. Would likely be underneath the headline umbrella. We've had a couple conversations, but we're looking for projects that we can add to our portfolio. So they to us, and we can see if there's a way to work on an acquisition with that too.
Right, and it makes sense, like as a negotiation, because it's like, okay, let's just say, for example, Headline can get can buy like one coder who's making one specific thing that's great, and that person doesn't want to be public. Excuse me. It's like, you think this could be worth a lot, but you don't want to be public. So what's that worth? What's your privacy worth to you? It's just an interesting thought.
Absolutely, and not only that, but there needs to be more continuity in the blockchain space, because there's just too many examples of something really exciting getting built and then getting abandoned by the core developers, right? And that doesn't have to happen, because there's always going to be somebody out there that will buy the thing you've made if it's innovative, especially if the price is right. And that's always a better solution than to abandon a project completely, right? When somebody else can, either turn that into its final form that it hasn't reached yet, or to integrate into something that they're building. And there needs to be that's an interesting question too, about like what you're saying about acquisitions, because it's the people that are building this to admit that, you know, these are real projects and real companies that have a real price tag, and they're not just these completely decentralized things, right? So it goes back to a recognition of, you know, the actual like business elements to anything that's being built too. All right, moving forward, because I'm not going to keep you guys all night. The point of this space is an introduction to a system that could work well to solve a lot of these issues, and I think the time is right for something like this to be put into effect. Let's have a quick conversation about what the next step should be for this, and then we can talk about time to have a follow-up session and potentially get more feedback from a larger portion of the community. So what would you guys like to see the next steps be with this, you know, towards moving it forward, if you guys think it's a good idea?
Well, for starters, I think somebody should make a post on forum, start that organic kind of grassroots effort for it, you know, tell a friend, and obviously build momentum, and then pick a date really, and have another conversation here perhaps.
My call dropped off for a second, but I liked what you mentioned, Aaron, about doing like creating a DAO that kind of focuses on, you know, if governance is focusing on like the protocol side of the house, like what about like the ecosystem success side of the house? Like how do I start a project on Algorand? What are the things that you need to consider to be verified? Like what are, you know, thinking of some of the tools you all have done with like AlgoSwap and Glyph and things along those lines. You have like almost a tool set where I can kind of come in with low code and like build, you know, a blockchain based project. Kind of all of that kind of wraps together in terms of like what is success look like if you're going to build an app in, you know, a platform like Algorand. I like the DAO concept a lot in terms of maybe a way to solve this.
One unique opportunity we have here is we're just about done with our analytics platform for Algo Cloud, which is a small piece of Algo Cloud, but that portion of it's almost done. Basically, customizable analytics for all the ASAs that are being traded, and you can kind of like determine what you're tracking, and you get to see a lot of interesting analytics about it. But we could potentially, in the next couple of weeks, put together a trial of this on the platform, where we use this kind of a tier-based system as badges for the different tokens, and then we can get actual user feedback if it's what they think about the system. So it would take quite a bit of refinement, and then we'd probably need to hire somebody to work on this, you know, exclusively for the next couple of weeks. But there's an opportunity to test this in the short term on a full scale, essentially.
So like, for example, you pull up Algo Cloud, hey, here's, you know, Yieldly, and this is the verification level. And then you kind of have a breakout in a table of like the core details of that project. And then, for example, like within that table, you could have almost like a comment field, like a community page, like with voting, or like, hey, you know, here's some good information on like their roadmap, or like something along those lines. Kind of a mix of like official monitoring tracking you get with like a standard platform, but then some of what we've seen with trends in like social media and like community voting on like Reddit, and like, hey, here's some good research. I guess, yeah, then you have to kind of moderate some of that, but just trying to kind of understand and break down what you mentioned a little bit more.
Yeah, so on a very like simplistic level, I was just, you know, because if you look on Algo Explorer or TinyChart right now, you'll see a little badge with a check mark in it, I believe. What we would probably do in lieu of that would be like a circle badge with either 1 to 5 stars in it, or some, you know, because you have to have still a little tiny icon, right? If you're looking at a table of tokens that the badge would represent, because you want to make it as compressed as possible for an initial thing, right? And then you could, if you click on it, you can see all the details. So that's what we would have to experiment with first, what that would actually look like. If we're going to use stars or something else. But it would be a very simplistic implementation of this, just to kind of see if there's a way to add all of this additional info into token analytics without it being like making it too heavy and hard to easily consume. So that would be the first challenge, essentially, that we'll probably take a look at.
I just had an idea for how to rate projects. So I don't know if any of you have seen, you probably have this like political spectrum scale. It's like looks like a cross within a square. And imagine the same thing, except people could vote on the x-axis mature to nascent, and on the y-axis legit to fraudulent. So it would basically come up with a point-based system and like a scatter graph of how people rate a project on a per project basis. I guess you could vote with like, I don't know, tokens. You would kind of need like to have your vote representative of maybe HDL tokens.
Yeah, these are all great ideas. And we're going to be closing the spaces in just a moment. But let's plan to do this again a week from today. So next Thursday at 8 p.m., we'll have a follow-up. And I'll, work to refine the system, and then we can, see which direction to go from there. Now, if any of you guys know somebody that's looking for a project that has experience with DAOs that would be potentially be interested in spearheading, creating a system that could be adopted ecosystem-wide, that would be fantastic. But in lieu of that, we can start looking at a way to implement this with the analytics on Algorand Cloud that will be releasing in a couple weeks here. That's kind of like where I see next week going on this. Get a lot more feedback, have a follow-up spaces, get more insight, and then see if we can put something into place live pretty quickly.
Thanks for including us as part of the process. Love to give more feedback.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next space, man. Thank you. Sorry.
No, go right ahead. Yeah, the floor is yours. Once you guys have said everything else that you would like to provide for this spaces, we'll convene. So the floor is you guys.
I just want to say thanks for doing it, Darren.
I want to say that a lot of us have amazing ideas when it comes to philosophically designing these systems. But if you can't code, and if you know a coder, just introduce them to blockchain stuff. Because I've introduced like a few of my friends who are coders to blockchain stuff, and they all like it, and they all end up like doing something with it. My friend's building an NFT website right now. My other friend like looks at it peripherally and just is interested in it. So if you know any engineers, like, don't hesitate to tell them about this crazy opportunity, because I feel like as an engineer in this space, you have the best opportunity of anyone probably.
All right, and then we are going to wrap the first session of the tiered ASA verification system, and we will talk about this offline, and we will convene a week from today. Take care, everyone.